Nancy Heinen and Carol Mills, thank you for accepting to meet a simpler next generation. They are students and interns. They work with us, and they are thrilled to meet you and to put some questions on you, if you don't mind. So let's start this round of questions with Julia. Please, Julia, take the floor.
Good evening, I'm Julia. I would like to ask you, what are the main challenges that you face as a woman during your career? And also, what do you think about how the gender diversity on corporate boards situation changed over the last 10, 15 years?
I'll start. Thank you for that thoughtful question. My last corporate position was at Apple, and I was the only woman on the executive team, and we had 0 women on the board. And I was there for almost 10 years, and I was the only woman on the executive team, and there were 0 women on the board. So it was isolating. It was very lonely in the sense that you were the one woman kind of in a position of power. There now, I think on the Apple board are 3 or 4 women. They have women on the executive team. That is one example of a corporation that has advanced gender equity. And on the boards, it's made a huge difference to have a requirement for gender diversity. It really has forced companies to step forward, bring women onto their board, and it turns out it's a good thing. So, but it's been embraced slowly and unevenly. There's been resistance, but it's definitely a movement, not a moment. And Carol and I are both delighted to be able to do what we can to promote women as they advance their careers. So thank you for that question.
I think that the movement to, or the requirement to have more women on boards has reduced the age of people in the boardroom, because there are not as many women CEOs as there are men CEOs. So they've had to reach into other functions of operating executives or other CXOs to fill the positions, because there are more positions open. And as a result, the board has become younger. And it also has, because of the young, it's not that young, but I mean 10 years younger perhaps, and that has created a vibrance in the boardroom that creates pressure on the male board members to really become more engaged and up their game as well. So I think it has forced or encouraged some of the older board members who should have retired, who were just comfortable, to leave. And that's a good thing. So I'd say it's rejuvenation and just more liveliness in the boardroom. So it's a big change. It's nice. It's quite nice.
Maria Vittoria.
Good evening, I'm Maria Vittoria. And do you think that the imposition by a law to incorporate a certain number of women in the board of directors, in your opinion, does not risk discrediting a woman's true worth, as people must be chosen for their merits and not for sex?
I think that at first it did, that people assumed, and it's always annoying, it is so infuriating to have people say you're only here because you're a woman and we needed to do that. But once you're in the position and you fulfill it and you do a good job, then that goes away. So I would say it does exist and it continues to exist sometimes, but it goes away with accomplishment. And what happens is the board isn't just board meetings. All boards have committees. So there's compensation committees, there's audit committees, there's governance committees, and then there's special strategic committees for acquisitions. There's litigation committees if there's derivative loss, when there are derivative lawsuits. And then there's also hiring committees. When you're changing CEOs, there will be a committee for that. There may be a nominations committee for new directors. So when you are, what happens is you really show your capabilities and abilities when you're on those committees, because the committees are small and they have very hard work to do, and they're always tough, just different issues. And either serving as an important member of a committee or a chair of a committee also makes your role more important, and you bring that back to the overall board. So it just happens. If you're qualified to be on the board, it shows, and you can't get around that.
iceberg melts slowly, but every time you have more women who are successful on the board, then it creates less resistance for some of the others coming on.
Thank you very much.
You make room. Maybe gender quota are not ideal, but it's like a medicine. You take it to make things better, and then you stop it, and one day there will be no need for quotas. But for now, when people criticize it, I always say, okay, I see your point. So what's your solution? What's the alternative? What's the strategy?
Yeah.
And there's no answer.
No, there's no answer.
It wasn't happening before.
No, it was not happening.
Not happening.
Right.
Next up, Vincenzo.
Hi, good evening. My name is Vincenzo.
He's a law student.
Yeah.
Because Maria Vittoria and Julia are students of economics.
Wonderful.
How do you take time off from your professional life? For example, during the pandemic, seeing as we were all in smart working, the billable hours increased. So I was answering several times. How did you manage to defend your personal interests and life?
I think we're in the privileged position of being retired from our day jobs. So we serve on boards and advise organizations. So we had a particular privilege. But I know, for example, my daughter works at Microsoft, and the hours were expanding very dramatically because you're sort of always around. And they then, Microsoft was an example of one who really made a conscious effort to limit that, to allow people to kind of declare when they're off duty, as it were. But I think that deliberateness, it's very hard because it just creeps in. You know, I mean, beginning of the pandemic, all of the organizations I was on the board were in crisis. They had to convert their programming, everything. So we were all the time, every day. So you had to say, this is the crisis. As we come into this new future of work, it's going to be very interesting, and that's a question I have of how people are going to demand the privacy that they're entitled to and how they're going to accommodate their business objectives. So I think there's still a lot to be worked out in the hybrid environment, but there's a lot of creative thinking around it and people trying out different models. So I'm encouraged we'll find something better, but you also have to insist yourself. And you have to take personal responsibility for kind of drawing the lines. I was a terrible example of that. Do not do. Yes, I worked for a man, Steve Jobs, who didn't sleep. Very bad to have a boss who doesn't sleep, but.
I think when you're on boards, you are at the timetable of the company. So there are always, every single trip, vacation, everything has been interrupted by an acquisition, and you never say no, you can't, that's the job, which reflects my operating career as well, right, everything interrupted. I think you always need to decide for yourself, you know, where you're going to set the boundaries, but as a board member, you need to be there when they need you. That's the job. So there is no boundary. You will take a call anytime, 6 o'clock, 7 o'clock. You may get it wrong. That's actually kind of funny. Traveling internationally, you're always on the wrong. Like your calendars don't adjust, and meetings come at the last minute. And it's like, I don't know whether it's which day it is. And especially, you know, going to Japan. That's the hardest. It's like, I don't know what day I am. But I think I agree with her about the pandemic. The pandemic completely erased. Yeah. But it also, you save a lot of money on clothing, right? You know, you just have to wear your hair up, and no shoes. It actually made a lot of things easier as well, because you could take off time to go take your dog someplace, or you know, those sorts of things. Do laundry while you're in meetings. Yeah. You know, there's it does make things somewhat easier. So there's benefits in that.
Yeah, some technology enables that. You can do your Zoom calls outside walking, you know, and I think a lot of people started to say, how do we embrace a combined life? But there's still...
It's
you have to defend
yourself. It's going to be very interesting what happens next when mask mandates come off, when people, are people going to be forced to come back to work? Are they going to choose to come back into the office? Right. How is that going to work? How persistent is this balance of working from home going to last? Who knows?
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Vincenzo.
Next up.
Good evening. Good evening. I'm Alice, and I wanted to ask you, it's said that the youngest generations have difficulties with finding a well-paid job. Does this apply to your area of expertise too?
If I think of law, I don't even want to tell you how much they're now paying starting lawyers at big law.
To keep people
Yeah.
from living.
Yeah.
It's, yes, I was very well advanced in my career before I ever approached what starting lawyers for big law firms in the United States are making, plus the bonuses that they're rolling out. Instead of once a year, quarterly, now they're going to monthly to keep people, because there is truly a great resignation. I mean, it is legitimate that a lot of people are saying, because the hours have not been cut back for lawyers, they're working so hard and they feel that they're always on call, that a number of them are reassessing what their prospects are going to be. And so the law firms are reacting by accelerating bonuses and upping the pay, but I still think there's a great reckoning for younger people about what trajectory they want to be on, law firm, elsewhere, whatever. And it's all shaky. It's not shaken out yet at all. I mean, it is in transition, and I don't know where they're going to end up.
But tech jobs, the hardest thing is to find people.
Yeah.
All of my companies have keeping talent, hiring talent, finding talent is the hardest thing.
And it's a high priority for the board, too. We're talking boards about talent retention, talent development. Yeah.
Yeah, so it's big. We haven't seen anybody have a problem finding jobs.
Yeah.
I'm Ricardo, and I'm an intern at Professor Matera's law firm. So I'd like to pose a question on you, Nancy. So if memory serves me right, you joined Apple in 1997 when it was on the edge of bankruptcy. And then you left in 2006 when it was about to launch the new iPhone. So what were the steps taken in order to shift the momentum and to put the company back on track? Thank you.
Great question, thank you. What came to mind is why I'm smiling is I had worked with Steve Jobs previously at a company that we'd sold to Apple. And Steve had another company that he was CEO of, a public company called Pixar Animation Studios. So he was also CEO of that. So he was going to go run Pixar, and Apple had a general counsel. So I wrote myself out of the deal. And about 6 months later, the board asked Steve to come in on an interim basis, advise the board. He did not want to be CEO because he was very concerned about the state of Apple. And over the next couple of months, he convinced me to come in. And my very first day, I walk in and the CFO says, "Hi, you know we're in a death spiral." I said, Fred, that's not quite how Steve described it. He said, "Well, we are. I'll show you where the executive team meets." So that was day one. And then it really took analyzing everything that was broken and putting in place plans. What was going to take the longest term was to try and get great products out, because product development, product manufacturing, product distribution was going to have a certain runway. In the meantime, we were hemorrhaging customers. We didn't have analysts covering us. It was really a challenge. So we wanted to provide marketing that would encourage people to hang on there. And Apple at the time ran an ad campaign called Think Different. And that was, here's to the crazy ones, here's, we were using Gustave Eiffel and Pablo Picasso. They had nothing to do with Gandhi, like nothing to do with computers. But the point was to try and get people to hang on of what made a Macintosh different. So we were trying to say, look, we know, but that is a strategy in the marketing. Then when you looked at distribution, we were very poorly represented in the stores that sold computers. So everything that ran on a Wintel device, a Windows Intel device, tons of software. And then over in the corner, you'd see this little bit of Macintosh software. So you'd think, why would I buy that? So we asked them to start to do what we called stores within a store, so that there was representation that was trained, that was dedicated to making it look that there was a more vibrant a Macintosh ecosystem around it. So we're working on our biggest, the distributors to get that in place. Then we're starting to figure out distribution again, because that was not not robust. It was not just in time, which we now have supply chain issues, but it was very sort of, we would manufacture and it would ship to a warehouse and then it would ship to another warehouse. So we started figuring out how to get the arrangements in place. So when the products actually were released, we could get them to market in the time when our marketing was most effective. We had them in a store that would advocate for them. We had gotten our customers to hang on, because thinking different was important to us. And then we finally had the products that would meet the needs. It was very hard. And in the meantime, just because it's never simple, we had to look at the organization as a whole. And when the patient's on life support, sometimes you have to kind of amputate limbs. So we shut down lines of business to make sure, might be selling X 100,000 of this, but that was at the cost of focusing on the millions of Macintoshes. So that was very hard decisions because those involved often laying off people, And then you also had to really look at the talent pool, and a lot of people were just too tired. They just couldn't do it. So how do you refresh by getting people who could be inspirational, and how do you keep those you most want to stay on? So we had a multifaceted approach, but there was a timeline that we were operating to because we knew we needed, this is in September we knew we needed to get to May of '98. And if that didn't work, then it was probably game over. I mean, if that Mac had not been a hit, I don't know what we would have done, really. So that was a very, very challenging year.
Yeah, thank you.
Carol, have you ever experienced a similar situation, a trouble situation like this? That was a yes.
I think that the hardest thing is what Nancy said of when you're in trouble, sometimes you have to amputate limbs. That's very hard.
Very hard.
It's extremely hard. It's not just hard to decide which limb, but it's also so hard from a people perspective that it just makes you sick. And of course, it's hardest on the people that are being let go, but it's also hard on the organization that's left. And that's the saddest because you failed. By definition, you failed because you started something you couldn't sustain, and it's hard on everyone involved. And I think that's something you don't get over. That's those decisions are the ones that you still think about years and years later. And so I think that's the hardest thing. Even when you get healthy again, you realize, okay, that was for good. It still doesn't feel good. No. It really doesn't.
Yeah.
So I was thinking about that. One of the things that they also did that was a good thing during that time is partnerships. Partnerships with Adobe. I was thinking,
new partnerships. Adobe. Yes, that's true.
Very, very positive partnerships. So it's not just inside the company, it's what other parts of the ecosystem, the total product, that customers buy, what else do you need in order to have a complete solution? And that's
one of the trickiest parts is we sort of had detente with Microsoft. And that was very challenging because they had 95% of the computers ran on Windows, and they had their Office suite ran on Macintosh. And we would not have survived if Microsoft had pulled the Windows suite of products from the Mac. It was too essential. So we had to make detente. And on a parallel path, the United States Department of Justice had an antitrust case running against Microsoft, and we provided some critical testimony that resulted in Microsoft losing that case. So that was high stakes. That was very high stakes.
The beginning of your century.
That was very, very challenging. So partnerships were critical.
Microsoft.
Martina, your turn.
Good evening again. I'm Martina. So nowadays, only 1 in 5 computer science degrees are earned by women. How do you think that this situation could be improved?
I think that a couple things. But what you're saying is women in technical jobs, because computer science prepares you for a technical job. One of the things that's happened really in the last, 15 years is that the technology required or the process required to bring a product to marketplace has a lot more tools that were available before. And one of the things I see, my daughter's at Facebook and she's a UX designer and she does not have a computer science degree, she's more of an artist. But the tools that are developed don't require a computer science degree. You know, it's really, and so development, she could actually call herself a developer. And I laugh because I used to be a software engineer. And it's like, no, you're not. You're not even close. And so, but a lot less of the product requires actually true software development skills than they used to. So that's one change. There's a lot more technical jobs that would have been considered, computer science before that are now available to people that don't have those kind of degrees. They have other degrees. But I think that this, typical things of just kind of encouraging women into math and science fields, all the way up, and that's really hard. It's hard to change that. One of the things that we're doing, that I'm doing this year is helping it's called Girls Who Code, a camp for girls. I don't know if it's going to work, but you just keep trying, trying this, trying that. I don't really know how to change that. It's not a popular thing. Actually, Penny's the math major. It's not a popular thing to be, math and science for girls a lot. It's just not as cool, I guess.
I mean, there is dedicated funding that a lot of philanthropists and other people are starting to put in to make sure that there are programs. And then there's some trying to influence artificial intelligence because most of the algorithms come up from male-dominated. So there's a professor at Stanford, Feifei Li, who has a program that takes particularly underrepresented kids, girls, and brings them in at middle school and starts to teach them how they could become, start to envision it. Because if you don't create a vision of what you could do, it's hard to plan for it. So it's how do you make that accessible in some way that can be approached when you're thinking about a career. And so there's a lot of points of light that we hope the tide will rise, but it's still a challenge.
I think a very large number of data scientists are women. It's,
that is increasing in the US at least.
A lot of the data scientists, which is not exactly computer science, but it's
close.
Pretty close. And it's a huge field. All of the analytics coming with data science. Yeah. And the structures and all those sorts of things are compelling.
And is the 1 in 5 ratio in Italy, or is that a global? Global, that's what I was wondering. I don't know if Italy difference. And the US seems like it's increasing. I don't have the ratio in mind. No.
I don't know why I got attracted to it. It's just a little nerd, I think.
For the record, for the audience, actually, Penny is Penny Hirscher. And you can find an interview with Penny in our Links Talk series, Because you mentioned her.
Yes, I did.
And yes, you mentioned her, Brian.
The Penny Hirscher.
You're right. Dorian, please.
Madams, my name is Dorian, and I am an intern at Professor Matera's law firm. And thank you for inspiring us this evening with your words. And my question is actually, what can we do in order to facilitate and speed up the progress of female leaders who will make a difference in the world and promote gender equity and, if we can say this, other types of equity, both in business and society?
Inclusion and diversity.
Yeah.
Diversity and
Yes.
inclusion.
Part is transparency. Who are the leaders? Who is there? Making it known and then making accountability, so that there are efforts. That you have to report on these things. If you measure it, sometimes the behavior changes. So that is an effort, I think, for the SEC and NASDAQ and all to try and get reporting on these things. Really, the investment is required to go younger. Again, we mentioned earlier on the sort of the humanizing AI by getting different voices represented. You need to get them younger. You just have to have inspirational role model stories. Storytelling is a huge part of what can motivate people to do great things. And we need to do that as well as have the numbers to back it up. So you want to inspire, but you really need to have accountability and transparency.
I think that we all when we see a situation that's not correct, we need to call it out.
Yeah.
And be very clear about that. When you see somebody being unfairly ignored, because that happens a lot. You see someone's comment being unfairly ignored or made fun of or dismissed or somebody just being overlooked is not letting that happen to anyone. And I think that's the most powerful thing in a boardroom and also the most powerful thing in business in general. You know, it happens a lot. I used to make jokes with, I would say something in a boardroom and there'd be no comment. And then 3 minutes later, one specific gentleman would say the same thing. And I thought, my lips, were they moving? Did I actually say that? Because everybody would agree with him. And it made me insane, it made me crazy. And I talked to another woman that was on the board and we joked about it, but we decided to just to support each other. When one of us would say a comment, we would do an immediate comment of, oh, I really agree with her. Her comment was really smart. Yes, listen, did everybody listen? And even 5 minutes later said, yeah, I want to go back to that point that she made and do it with anybody that's being overlooked. And then one of the other really good practices in meetings is to have the practice of going around and making sure that everybody's opinion is being heard, because it draws out the ones that are reluctant, and usually you get great ideas, because sometimes the more talkative people dominate the room, and the quieter ones are too shy to speak up, or they're not used to it, or they have a language issue, or something. They've been up too late the night before, I don't know. And if you ask them directly, what do you think, you get amazing answers, and it creates, it's really good. So I just think that it's all of our jobs to do that, because it creates inclusiveness, it creates warmth, a team, all of those things. And if we don't, I think we all fail.
Yeah.
So
I think that intentionality is critical. And what Carol says, I know, as a board chair, often meeting design is a critical part of making sure that every voice is represented in the conversation. But it's intentionality and that whole design around inclusiveness and calling people out is really, and supporting other voices, really important.
And if somebody steps out of line, you call them and you say,
you
that's
have to
not
call.
fair, that's not true, so that the person doesn't have to defend themselves.
Yeah.
And sometimes you get, told you're an idiot because that's not that. You're argumentative. It's like, you know what, okay, yeah, sure.
I trust in this generation. I trust new generation. I think that those parts of those issues will be over when they will be in power.
Yeah.
Because I do believe it.
I do too.
Yes, I agree.
I do too.
I agree.
Yeah.
So thank you again. Thank you, Dorian. Thank you, everybody. And I'll see you very soon back in Rome.
Absolutely.
And next time, please, I would like you to give a public lecture and meet all our students.
We would love to do that. We appreciate it.
Would you mind?
Great questions and wonderful to meet you, of course.
Yes, thank you.
Oh, do we have to come back?
Thank you. Take care and stay safe.
Thank you. Great. Thank you. Thank you all.
Thank
It's
you.
very thoughtful.